The fluorescent lights of the Havenwood Town Hall auditorium cast a sterile, unforgiving glare over the already contentious public meeting, a light that seemed to bleach all warmth and nuance from the room. Jonathan Cole, Chief Legal Counsel, to Mayor Evelyn Hayes. Her name a recurring motif for competent ethical leadership, now gracing the mayoral office with a quiet determination that often masked a fierce resolve, sat in the front row. A meticulously organized sheaf of notes, cross-referenced and tabbed, rested on his lap, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. He'd learned long ago that in Havenwood, politics revealing one's hand too early was a tactical error. Tonight's agenda was dominated almost exclusively by a proposed and long overdue expansion of 80 compliant accessibility features throughout the town's historic downtown district. A comprehensive plan encompassing wider sidewalks, significantly more curb cuts, improved audible pedestrian signals, and the undeniable flashpoint for tonight's anticipated fireworks. Several new, structurally sound, and aesthetically considered wheelchair ramps for older municipal buildings that had remained stubbornly, shamefully inaccessible for decades. The opposition, Jonathan knew, with a weary certainty born of long bruising experience in Havenwood's political trenches, would be fierce, vociferous, and almost certainly disingenuous. It would be spearheaded, as it so often was, when progress threatened the status quo by one formidable, implacable woman, Ms. Karen Albright, president of the powerful and deeply entrenched Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association. Albright was a self-appointed, unyielding guardian of Havenwood's vaguely defined historic character, a term she usually invoked when opposing anything that might benefit communities outside her affluent enclave, and an even more vaguely defined fiscal responsibility, a cudgel she wielded against any social program, regardless of its necessity or moral imperative. Jonathan had also noted with a growing prickle of professional unease that bordered on outright suspicion Albright's increasingly frequent hushed meetings with Maxwell Thorne. Thorne was a notorious local developer whose reputation for aggressive, often predatory business tactics and a portfolio of bland, oversized condominium projects that seemed to suck the soul from any neighborhood they invaded preceded him like a foul odor. Jonathan had initially dismissed these clandestine conferences as typical HOA lobbying regarding zoning variances Thorne might be seeking, or perhaps Thorne angling for Albright's influential, if controversial, endorsement for some Oak Haven Hills adjacent luxury development. The pieces hadn't quite clicked into a more sinister, overarching pattern. Not yet. But the frequency and secrecy of their meetings were an itch he couldn't quite scratch. Adding to Jonathan's undercurrent of anxiety, an anxiety that had kept him up most of the previous night, was a recent, deeply disturbing development. Just 2 days prior, an anonymous email crafted with a chillingly passive-aggressive tone had landed in Mayor Hayes' official inbox. It was CC'd pointedly to Jonathan and all town council members. Ostensibly from a concerned Havenwood business owner, it began by decrying the crippling and unnecessary financial burden of the ADA proposal, but quickly and viciously devolved into a thinly veiled, highly personal attack on Ethan Cole. The email referred to Ethan as an overly vocal and manipulative prop being exploited by his father, and warned with a distinct undercurrent of menace that his continued public agitation for these wasteful projects could lead to unforeseen and unfortunate personal consequences for him and for those who unscrupulously exploit his condition for political gain. Mayor Hayes had been incandescent with a rarely seen cold fury. Jonathan, though equally, if not more furious, had channeled his raw anger into immediate methodical action. He'd immediately tasked a tech-savvy intern in the mayor's office, a bright young woman with a knack for digital forensics, with attempting to trace the email's IP address. The preliminary trace, masked by several layers of anonymizing proxy servers, had disturbingly, if not conclusively, pointed to an IP block frequently associated with Thorne Development's corporate offices on the outskirts of Havenwood. It was circumstantial, Thorne would undoubtedly deny it, but it was deeply unsettling, a cold knot of dread tightening in Jonathan's stomach. He had debated whether to even tell Ethan about the email not wanting to frighten him before his important speech. But Ethan, with his usual perceptiveness, had sensed his father's heightened tension and had gently pressed him until Jonathan reluctantly shared the threat. Ethan's reaction had been a mixture of fear and a quiet, steely resolve that both broke Jonathan's heart and filled him with a fierce, protective pride. "They're just trying to scare us, Dad," Ethan had said, his jaw set. "It means what we're doing is important. I have to speak." Micham, next to Jonathan, now exuding a calm he clearly didn't entirely feel, sat his 14-year-old son, Ethan. A bright, articulate, and remarkably self-possessed freshman at Havenwood High, Ethan also happened to use a lightweight, nimble wheelchair due to a congenital spinal cord condition, spina bifida. He was not defined by his chair, far from it. He was empowered by his sharp intellect, his surprisingly mature empathy, and his unwavering commitment to disability advocacy. He served with distinction as a youth representative on the town's newly formed Accessibility Advisory Committee, a position he'd earned through insightful, well-researched contributions that often put adult committee members to shame. And he had prepared a short, eloquent, and deeply personal statement to read in support of the proposed ADA upgrades. Jonathan felt a familiar, powerful surge of immense pride, inextricably mixed with a gnawing, protective anxiety that never truly receded, an anxiety now amplified tenfold by the anonymous threat lurking in the digital shadows. He watched Ethan adjust the microphone on the podium during the designated public comment period, his small shoulders squared with a courage that humbled his father. Councilman David Graham, a well-respected second-term council member, generally known for his progressive stance on social issues and his vocal, consistent support for the ADA initiative, gave Ethan an encouraging, avuncular nod from the dais. Graham had often publicly praised Ethan's articulate contributions to the committee, even once suggesting Ethan had a future in politics. His support had always seemed genuine, a welcome counterpoint to Albright's incessant negativity. "Oh, good evening, Mayor Hayes, members of the town council." Ethan began, his voice remarkably clear and steady, projecting a confidence that belied his youth, though Jonathan, attuned to his son's every micro-expression, could see the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. A tremor Jonathan now knew was less about typical public speaking nerves and more about the insidious undercurrent of menace they both felt hanging in the stale auditorium air. "My name is Ethan Cole, and I am a lifelong resident of Havenwood. I'm here tonight not just as a member of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, but as a citizen of this town, to speak in strong and unequivocal support of the proposed ADA accessibility upgrades. For me," Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping across the council members, then lingering for a moment on Karen Albright, who watched him with an expression of utter disdain. "And for many other residents in our town, young and old, who navigate a wide spectrum of mobility challenges daily, these aren't just upgrades or abstract line items in a municipal budget. They are essential pathways to full, meaningful, and dignified participation in the rich life of our community. A simple ramp, Mayor Hayes, something so easily overlooked or dismissed as an inconvenience by those who don't personally need it, can mean the difference between accessing a vital public service, like this very town hall, and being effectively, humiliatingly shut out. It can mean the difference between joining friends and family for a community event and being forced to remain an unwilling outsider left behind invisible. It's about dignity, Mayor. It's about equality. It's about fundamental fairness. It's about making Havenwood a town that truly, demonstrably, and actively welcomes everyone, not just in hollow words printed on a brochure, but in tangible, concrete action." He spoke for another 2 minutes, his words heartfelt, his arguments cogent, well-researched, and delivered with a quiet passion that resonated through the room. He referenced specific ADA statutes, local non-discrimination ordinances, and even studies on the economic benefits of universal design with a precision and command of the material that impressed even his legally minded father. A genuine, warm, and surprisingly robust smattering of applause followed his statement, a sound that seemed to momentarily dispel some of an auditorium's usual apathy. Then Karen Albright, resplendent and formidable in a sharply tailored Chanel suit, the color of dried blood that seemed to serve as both armor and a declaration of war, her silver hair coiffed into an unyielding lacquered helmet, strode with imperious, practiced confidence to the opposing podium. Her smile was tight, a mere bearing of expensive dental work, her eyes like chips of glacial ice, cold and unblinking. "Mayor Hayes, council members." Albright began, her voice dripping with a cloying, insincere sweetness that barely masked a deep-seated, almost reptilian condescension. It was a tone Jonathan had heard her use countless times before, usually as a prelude to a particularly vicious attack. While we all appreciate young Mr. Cole's rather theatrical passion and his predictable youthful idealism, we must also, as responsible elected stewards of this town's finances, be ruthlessly, unsentimentally realistic. These proposed upgrades, as he so euphemistically and repeatedly calls them, represent an exorbitant, fiscally irresponsible, and frankly largely unnecessary and ill-conceived expense for the hard-working, already overburdened taxpayers of Havenwood. She paused, letting her words hang in the air, her gaze sweeping disdainfully over the supporters of the ADA plan. They will irrevocably mar, indeed desecrate, the historic aesthetic of our beautiful, unique downtown, an aesthetic, I might add, that my late husband and I, along with many other concerned citizens, fought for decades to preserve from ill-advised modernizations. They will create significant, perhaps insurmountable traffic flow disruptions and undoubtedly exacerbate our already critical downtown parking nightmares. And frankly, her gaze flickered dismissively, contemptuously towards Ethan, a look so fleeting yet so laden with profound personal contempt it made Jonathan's jaw tighten until it ached. They cater to a very small, albeit very vocal, and I must say increasingly demanding minority, who seem to believe the entire town, its budget, its infrastructure, and its architectural integrity should revolve entirely around their special needs and their unending sense of entitlement. Ethan, though Jonathan saw the raw hurt register in his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed, remained remarkably composed, his quiet resilience a potent, unspoken rebuke to Albright's calculated venom. "Ms. Albright," he said, his voice polite, but edged with a new firmness, a strength that seemed to surprise even himself, cutting cleanly through her patronizing, dismissive tone. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which is federal law, is not about special needs or special favors. It's about fundamental, inalienable civil rights, a concept enshrined in the very fabric of our nation's legal and moral code. In ensuring equitable access for all citizens, Ms. Albright isn't an expense to be grudgingly borne or endlessly debated. It's an investment in our community's core values, an investment in inclusivity and justice, and ultimately in our shared humanity. Albright's carefully maintained facade of icy composure shattered. Her face flushed a dangerous mottled shade of crimson, the color rising up her neck like a tide of pure rage. She took an almost imperceptible, yet undeniably predatory step towards Ethan, her body quivering with a barely suppressed volcanic fury. "Justice civil rights." She spat, her voice suddenly, a venomous, sibilant hiss, raw and uncontrolled, that carried with chilling clarity to every corner of the suddenly silent auditorium. "You entitled little brat, you and your kind are always demanding more, pushing your radical agenda, special ramps, special parking, special treatment, special everything. You're a drain on this community's precious resources. You're an eyesore, a blight on our town's carefully cultivated image. You don't belong here. People like you should be kept out of sight, not paraded around demanding the world cater to you." And then, in a shocking, grotesque act of unadulterated visceral malice that stunned the entire auditorium into a horrified, breathless, almost unholy silence, Karen Albright leaned forward, her face contorted into a mask of pure demonic fury, and spat directly, deliberately into Ethan Cole's face. Time seemed to warp, to distend, to almost stop. Ethan recoiled as if physically struck, his eyes wide with disbelief, shock, and a profound, soul-deep humiliation that no child should ever have to endure. A glob of saliva, obscene and viscous, trickled slowly, agonizingly down his cheek. Sarah, Jonathan's wife, who had been watching with a mother's fierce pride and anxiety, gasped audibly from her seat in the audience, a strangled, wounded sound. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Albright, blazing with a mixture of abject horror and incandescent maternal fury. You monster! You're a disgrace! Karen Albright!" Sarah choked out her voice, trembling with a rage that mirrored Jonathan's own. Mayor Hayes looked utterly appalled, her face paling her gavel frozen midair, her expression one of profound shock and disgust. Even Councilman Graham appeared aghast, shaking his head slowly in disbelief, his mouth slightly agape. Jonathan Cole felt a surge of white-hot primal rage, so intense, so visceral, it almost buckled his knees. A roaring like a freight train filled his ears, momentarily drowning out all other sound. This was his son, his brave, articulate, vulnerable son, publicly assaulted, defiled, humiliated for daring to advocate with dignity and intelligence for his basic human and civil rights. For an agonizing instant, all his years of legal training of practice detachment threatened to evaporate. But then decades of rigorous discipline, of hard-won courtroom composure, of mastering the art of controlled righteous fury, kicked in with the force of a deeply ingrained reflex. He rose slowly, deliberately from his seat, his movements measured almost preternaturally. Calm his face, a mask of cold, unyielding, terrifying fury. He walked with quiet, deliberate steps towards the podium, towards Karen Albright, who now finally seemed to realize with a dawning, panicked flicker in her icy eyes that she had just irrevocably, catastrophically crossed a line from which there was no dignified retreat, no escape, no matter her wealth or influence. Ms. Albright. Jonathan set his voice quiet, almost conversational, yet resonating with a steely, unmistakable authority, a palpable weight that silenced every rustle, every shocked whisper, every indrawn breath in the packed, suddenly tomb-like auditorium. You have just committed assault and battery upon a minor. You have committed this vile, despicable act upon a disabled individual in a public forum during an official government proceeding. This act, witnessed by hundreds of people and recorded by multiple media outlets and personal devices, also constitutes a clear and egregious violation of federal hate crime statutes, specifically those pertaining to acts motivated by disability bias, as well as numerous state laws. His voice, though low, seemed to magnify each word a precisely aimed hammer blow, devoid of heat, but heavy with consequence. You assaulted my son Karen. You spat on my child. You did this. And I assure you, you are going to pay for this fully and completely. I suggest you remain exactly where you are. The Havenwood Police Department officers present in this hall will be here momentarily to take your preliminary statement, and then I have absolutely no doubt they will be taking you into custody. He then turned his gaze, sweeping with cold command, to the stunned, uniformed security guards stationed at the side of the auditorium. Officers. His tone was now crisp, professional, commanding. Please ensure Ms. Albright does not leave this room under any circumstances. Secure all exits immediately. And immediately secure all video and audio recordings of this meeting from all official town sources and any media present. They are now critical evidence in a felony criminal investigation. One of the town council members, a usually timid elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who rarely spoke out, found her voice trembling but clear. This is an outrage, Karen, an absolute outrage, utterly unacceptable behavior in a civilized society. Her words seemed to break the spell for some, and a low murmur of agreement and disgust rippled through the crowd. Karen Albright stared at Jonathan, her face ashen, her carefully constructed arrogance finally irrevocably gone, replaced by a dawning, naked terror. A visible tremor ran through her expensive Chanel suit. She had just spat in the face of a disabled child. She had done it in front of hundreds of witnesses on multiple cameras in a moment of uncontrolled public rage. And she had done it directly in front of the one man in Havenwood who possessed the power, the intricate legal expertise, the unwavering determination, and now the deeply personal, unshakable, and utterly ferocious motivation to ensure she faced the full, unyielding, and merciless force of the law. Her long, toxic reign of nimbious terror, her callous disregard for decency and humanity, was about to come to a very public, very ignominious, and very, very deserved end. The immediate aftermath was a controlled chaos. As Albright, now babbling incoherently about misunderstandings and demanding her high-powered attorney, was being firmly but professionally escorted out by two Havenwood police officers who had materialized with swift efficiency, Jonathan was by Ethan's side, his primary concern, overriding even his incandescent rage, his son's emotional and physical well-being. Sarah was already there, gently cleaning Ethan's face, murmuring words of comfort, her eyes still blazing at the retreating figure of Albright. Mayor Hayes quickly and decisively adjourned the meeting, her voice tight with fury, promising a full investigation and accountability. The investigation into Albright's direct assault and the associated hate crime charges began immediately and was in many ways straightforward, backed by overwhelming undeniable video evidence and a plethora of credible eyewitness testimony. But the anonymous threatening email and its apparent, if still somewhat murky, link to Maxwell Thorne added another far more complex and potentially insidious layer to the unfolding drama. Jonathan knew with a chilling certainty that Albright's monstrous act, while personally motivated by her own bigotry, might also be a symptom of a larger, more calculated campaign. Over the following weeks, which felt like months to the Cole family, two parallel and increasingly intertwined investigations unfolded with methodical intensity. The criminal case against Albright for the assault and hate crime was meticulously prepared by the Haven County District Attorney's Office, with DA Maria Rodriguez, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor known for her tenacity, personally taking the lead. Simultaneously, Jonathan, working in his capacity as chief legal counsel, but also as a deeply concerned father, liaised closely with a dedicated HPD cybercrimes unit and with Mayor Hayes's full, unwavering support to delve deeper into the shadowy operations of Maxwell Thorne and his potential connection to the intimidation campaign. Thorne, when initially questioned by detectives, was the picture of smug, untouchable arrogance. He contemptuously dismissed any knowledge of the threatening email, though he couldn't resist sneering about the ADA project. "Bad for business, Cole. Stifles growth. Some people just don't get it," he'd remarked to a detective, a comment that was duly noted. He had an alibi for the exact time the email was sent, claiming to be in a high-level meeting across town, an alibi his well-paid executives readily corroborated. Financial records, however, subpoenaed by DA. Rodriguez's office, at Jonathan's persistent urging, began to paint a different, more incriminating picture. They revealed a complex, deliberately convoluted web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and opaque financial transactions between Thorne Development, various Albright-controlled family trusts, and several shadowy LLCs, linked to Albright's late husband's sprawling and notoriously ethically challenged real estate empire. It became increasingly clear through painstaking forensic accounting that Albright and Thorne had a significant, deeply intertwined, and very secret shared financial interest in acquiring and redeveloping a contiguous block of several key properties in the historic downtown district, properties whose value would be negatively impacted or whose lucrative redevelopment plans would be significantly complicated and rendered less profitable by the extensive federally mandated ADA upgrades. Their loudly proclaimed historic character argument was, as Jonathan had long suspected, little more than a cynical, self-serving smokescreen for unadulterated greed. Bank statements, once unsealed, showed a series of large, suspiciously timed and poorly disguised payments from Thorne Development to a consulting firm secretly owned by Albright Payments that coincided precisely with the intensification of her public anti-ADA campaign and the filing of her HOA's frivolous lawsuits. Security footage from a discreet traffic camera outside Thorne's opulent corporate office, obtained via a hard-fought warrant, showed Albright entering and leaving his building with increasing frequency in the months leading up to the town hall incident, often carrying rolled-up blueprints and looking furtive. The narrative for the prosecution team began to solidify Thorne. The ruthless Machiavellian developer was the likely puppet master, the strategic mastermind behind the broader, well-funded campaign to derail the ADA project, using the vain and prejudiced Albright as his public attack dog, his vocal mouthpiece, and leveraging her considerable HOA influence and her social standing to give his grubby financial aims a veneer of civic concern. The threatening email, still preliminarily traced to his company's IP block, appeared to be his characteristic way of attempting to intimidate a key and particularly effective advocate, Ethan Cole. Albright's vile public act, while fueled by her own deep-seated bigotry, fit neatly into this larger disturbing picture of desperate escalating measures to protect their joint ill-gotten financial interests. A local small business owner, Tom Pritchard, who ran a struggling third-generation hardware store in the heart of the historic district, had initially been a vocal and seemingly passionate opponent of the ramps, citing prohibitive costs and potential business disruption. He had been seen meeting with Albright on several occasions, and an anonymous tip, later found to have been deliberately planted by someone connected to Thorne's operation, clearly aiming to misdirect the investigation, suggested he'd received a substantial, unexplained cash payment from her just before he started his public campaign against the ADA measures. For a tense week, Pritchard became a significant red herring. Jonathan and the HPD detectives investigated him thoroughly. However, Pritchard, when confronted with the evidence, tearfully and convincingly produced bank records and sworn affidavits from family members showing that the payment was a legitimate life-saving loan from a distant wealthy aunt to prevent his historic family business from going into bankruptcy. He confessed he'd only opposed the ramps due to genuine, if ultimately misguided, financial fears stoked by Albright's alarmist rhetoric. Once Mayor Hayes and the town council offered him concrete financial mitigation assistance and a phased construction schedule, Pritchard had a change of heart and became a public, if somewhat sheepish, supporter of the accessibility plan. This cleared him, definitively refocusing the intensifying suspicion squarely back onto the Thorne-Albright axis. The trial of Karen Albright, when it finally commenced, after months of legal wrangling and intense media buildup, was nothing short of a statewide sensation. The courtroom was packed daily with reporters, disability advocates, curious locals, and the stony-faced supporters of Albright, who still inexplicably to Jonathan viewed her as a martyr. D.A. Maria Rodriguez, a formidable courtroom presence, first presented the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of the assault itself. The crystal-clear, multi-angle videos that had gone viral, Ethan's calm, dignified, yet emotionally impactful testimony about the humiliation and fear he had experienced, Sarah Cole's tearful but resolute account of witnessing the attack on her son. Albright's high-priced defense team, led by a notoriously aggressive, out-of-state attorney, attempted to mount a weak defense, relying on desperate claims of momentary lapse of judgment due to extreme provocation, and insidious attempts to paint Ethan as a rehearsed and manipulative young activist rather than a victim. These tactics backfired spectacularly with the jury and the public. Then D.A. Rodriguez, in a bold and somewhat controversial move, began to meticulously lay out the evidence of the broader conspiracy, arguing persuasively that Albright's despicable act was not an isolated incident of spontaneous rage, but rather a calculated, if poorly executed, part of a larger concerted effort, likely orchestrated and funded by Maxwell Thorne to intimidate, silence, and derail proponents of the ADA law, thereby protecting their secret lucrative redevelopment scheme. The threatening email, its IP address still pointing, however circumstantially, towards Thorne's corporate network, was presented as key evidence of his direct involvement in the campaign of intimidation targeting a minor. Maxwell Thorne, though not yet formally on trial for the assault itself, charges against him were being prepared, separately, was repeatedly named as an unindicted co-conspirator with D.A. Rodriguez making it clear that further indictments against him were pending based on the ongoing financial investigation. Thorne's lawyer, a sleek reptilian man named Marcus Slade, who was present in court monitoring the proceedings, looked increasingly uncomfortable, his usual smirk noticeably absent. The dramatic, unexpected climax of the trial, the moment that would send shockwaves through Havenwood and beyond, came not from a surprise witness or a last-minute piece of evidence against Albright or Thorne, but from an unexpected quarter during the technical testimony related to the threatening email. As part of establishing the origin and authenticity of the email, the prosecution called their IT forensic expert, a brilliant, meticulously prepared young woman named Anya Sharma. Ms. Sharma, calm and professional under intense cross-examination from Albright's attorney, testified that while the initial superficial IP trace had indeed pointed towards a general IP block used by Thorne Development's corporate network, a trace that was likely deliberately engineered to be found, a deeper, more sophisticated forensic analysis of the email's complete headers, cross-referenced with Havenwood Town Hall's own internal server logs and Wi-Fi access records, revealed something utterly startling and deeply disturbing. "The email in question, Your Honor." Ms. Sharma stated, her voice clear and precise, addressing the judge but holding the entire courtroom wrapped, while cleverly routed through several layers of anonymizing proxy servers that superficially and misleadingly implicated Mr. Thorne's company network actually and definitively originated from within the Havenwood Town Hall secure internal network. A stunned, disbelieving murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters leaned forward, furiously scribbling notes. Jonathan felt a cold dread, a sickening lurch in his stomach. This was not what they expected. Specifically, Ms. Sharma, D.A. Rodriguez, pressed her own expression, carefully neutral, though Jonathan sensed she knew what was coming. "Can you elaborate on how this email was sent from within Town Hall's secure network?" "Yes," Ms. Sharma replied, adjusting her glasses. "The email was sent using the Town Hall's private, password-protected Wi-Fi network, the network designated TH Council Secure. Access to this particular network is highly restricted, limited to town council members, and selects senior municipal staff for official business." D.A. Rodriguez then asked the crucial question, her voice ringing with anticipation. "And were you able, Ms. Sharma, through your forensic analysis, to determine which specific set of credentials were used to access this secure network to send the threatening email targeting Ethan Cole?" "Yes, Madam Prosecutor, I was," Ms. Sharma replied, her gaze unwavering. "The network access logs, which are immutable and time-stamped, show conclusively that the secure Wi-Fi network was accessed at the precise time the email was sent, using the unique username and password credentials officially assigned by the town IT department to Councilman David Graham." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps of disbelief, shouts of outrage, the frantic clicking of cameras. Reporters scrambled for the exits, desperate to file the bombshell story. Mayor Hayes, sitting in the gallery alongside Sarah Cole, looked as if she'd been physically struck, her face paling, her expression one of utter shock and profound betrayal. Jonathan felt a wave of nausea, a sickening sense of disorientation. Graham, David Graham, the supportive ally, the progressive champion, the man who had personally encouraged Ethan. It was inconceivable, a betrayal almost too profound to comprehend. Councilman David Graham, who had been a picture of righteous indignation and supportive concern throughout the entire ordeal, suddenly went ashen, a ghastly shade of gray. His eyes, wide with terror, darted around the courtroom like a trapped, panicked animal. He seemed to shrink in his chair, all color draining from his face. Thorne's lawyer, Marcus Slade, was instantly on his feet, loudly, performatively demanding a mistrial, claiming prosecutorial misconduct and a tainted jury pool. But the judge, a seasoned jurist who had seen her share of courtroom drama, quickly and forcefully restored order, her voice like cracking ice. The next day, the trial was temporarily recessed, under intense, relentless questioning by D.A. Rodriguez and federal investigators, who were immediately brought into the loop and faced with the irrefutable, damning digital evidence presented by Anya Sharma, a crumbling, visibly broken Councilman David Graham, confessed to everything. Maxwell Thorne, it turned out, with his penchant for digging up dirt, had discovered evidence of an old, almost forgotten bribery scandal from Graham's first much poorer and desperate campaign for a minor county position nearly a decade ago. A stupid, youthful mistake involving illicit campaign contributions that Graham had foolishly thought long buried and forgotten. Thorne, a master manipulator, had been systematically, ruthlessly blackmailing him for months, possibly years. Graham's coerced role was to subtly sabotage the ADA project from within, to feed Thorne vital inside information about the town's legal strategy and negotiating positions, and crucially to create misdirection and sow discord. Thorne had ordered Graham to send the threatening email to Ethan Cole from within Town Hall using a sophisticated method involving layered proxies that would initially point towards Thorne's own company network. Thorne's twisted, diabolical logic was that if the email plot unraveled and was traced back to him, he could plausibly deny it, or if it stuck, it would make him appear to be the primary villain, the obvious instigator of the intimidation, thus deflecting any suspicion from Graham's more insidious ongoing betrayal and his crucial role as Thorne's mole on the council. Thorne likely believed he could weather a minor storm over a vaguely threatening email, especially if Graham, his puppet, helped muddy the waters and publicly denounce Thorne. The substantial payments from Thorne to Albright were not just for her noisy HOA advocacy, as initially suspected, but were also in part hush money being laundered through Albright to Graham for his cooperation and to keep him silent about the blackmail. Albright, in her monumental arrogance and greed, likely saw herself as an indispensable, powerful partner, to Thorne never fully grasping that she too was in many ways just another disposable pawn in his larger, more cynical game with the compromised Councilman Graham. The public and the media were aghast, reeling from the sheer audacity and depth of the betrayal. The good councilman, the progressive champion, the supposed friend of the Cole family, an advocate for the disabled, was a compromised, blackmailed mole, a traitor to his constituents and his stated principles. Karen Albright was still undeniably, unequivocally guilty of a vile, despicable hate crime and a brutal assault, her personal prejudice and cruelty laid bare for all the world to see. But the shocking revelation about Councilman Graham exposed a deeper, more insidious, and perhaps more troubling corruption, a chilling reminder that power could fester, betray, and putrefy in the most unexpected and seemingly virtuous of places. The narrative of Havenwood's struggle was no longer a simple binary tale of rich, prejudiced woman versus innocent, disabled child. It was now a complex, sordid, and heartbreaking web of greed, blackmail, political treachery, and moral compromise. Karen Albright was swiftly convicted by the jury on all charges related to the assault and the hate crime. Her desperate last-minute attempts to blame Graham or Thorne for her actions or to claim she too was a victim fell on deaf, unsympathetic ears, given her own very public, very deliberate, and very violent actions. She received a significant, well-deserved prison sentence, effectively ending her reign of terror in Havenwood. Maxwell Thorne, his elaborate web of manipulation and corruption, now spectacularly exposed by Graham's confession and the uncovered financial trail of blackmail, bribery, and conspiracy, was arrested by federal agents shortly thereafter, just as he was attempting to board a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty. His trial, which promised to be even more sensational than Albright's, was scheduled for the following year. Councilman David Graham resigned from the town council in utter disgrace an hour before he was formally arrested. He later pleaded guilty to a raft of federal and state charges, including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accepting bribes. His political career was over, his reputation irrevocably shattered, his name becoming a byword for political betrayal in Havenwood. In the aftermath of the trials and the shocking revelations, Havenwood was profoundly rocked, but also strangely galvanized. The betrayal by Graham, while a deep and painful wound, for many, particularly Mayor Hayes and the Cole family, seemed to redouble the community's commitment to transparency, ethical governance, and genuine progressive change. Mayor Hayes, deeply shaken by the betrayal of a trusted colleague, but resolute in her leadership, addressed the town in a televised speech. "We have been betrayed from within our own government, and that is a wound that will take time and much effort to heal. But let this painful episode serve as a stark lesson. Corruption in all its forms will be rooted out, and justice, however complex or delayed, will ultimately prevail. Our collective commitment to building a truly accessible, equitable, and just Havenwood is now stronger, more determined than ever before. The ADA upgrades, once so contentious and divisive, were now passed by the reconstituted town council with overwhelming, almost unanimous support, becoming a powerful symbol of the town's renewed dedication to its highest values." Ethan's Law. The local ordinance significantly enhancing penalties for disability-motivated crimes and establishing a robust victim support fund was drafted by Jonathan and championed by Ethan and Mayor Hayes. It was enacted swiftly, with Councilman Graham's disgraced empty seat serving as a silent, potent reminder of the cost of corruption. Jonathan Cole, while deeply disturbed and personally wounded by Graham's treachery, focused his energies on supporting Ethan, who, despite the added trauma of the conspiracy and the betrayal by someone he had admired, remained a beacon of quiet strength, resilience, and astonishing wisdom. "I'm proud of what we did, Dad," Ethan said one cool autumn evening, as they sat together watching construction crews expertly installing a new, beautifully designed ramp at the entrance to the Havenwood Public Library, a project Ethan himself had tirelessly championed. "But it's a lot to process. Knowing someone we trusted, someone who pretended to be our friend, could do that, it makes you wonder about things about people. He paused, his young face etched with a seriousness far beyond his years. I still hear her voice sometimes, you know, the hate in it, that sound. And now I also wonder who else isn't what they seem. It's harder to trust. Jonathan nodded slowly, his heart aching with a mixture of profound pride in his son's resilience and sorrow for the innocence that had been so brutally stripped away. It's a very hard lesson, Ethan, one of the hardest, but it doesn't change who you are or what's right or the importance of fighting for it. We keep fighting for what's right, for justice, no matter where the opposition comes from or how cleverly it's disguised. A small recalcitrant group, the Havenwood Heritage and Fiscal Prudence League, a thinly veiled successor to Albright's defunct HOA power base, now likely funded by other shadowy interests, still occasionally distributed their poorly printed, hateful flyers, their tired rhetoric now sounding even more hollow, more desperate in the face of the exposed corruption and the town's clear, progressive momentum. The fight for true inclusivity, for lasting justice. Jonathan knew was ongoing, complex, and the enemies weren't always the obvious, cartoonish villains. Sometimes they wore the mask of friendship, of alliance. As Jonathan watched Ethan confidently, skillfully navigate that gleaming new ramp into the beautifully renovated Havenwood Library, a library now fully accessible to everyone, a tangible symbol of their hard-won victory, he put a hand on his son's shoulder. You did this, Ethan, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. Your courage, your voice, your refusal to be silenced. You made Havenwood better. You're making the world better. Karen Albright had sought to silence a child with an act of base cruelty. Maxwell Thorne had sought to manipulate an entire town for his own sordid profit. David Graham had tragically succumbed to his own weakness and fear. But in doing so, they had unwittingly, ironically exposed the deep cracks in the system, the hidden fault lines of prejudice and corruption. And in their place, something far more resilient, more honest, and more profoundly decent was being painstakingly, determinedly built, one ramp, one law, one hard-won, often complicated victory at a time. The taste of betrayal was undeniably bitter, a lingering poison. But the taste of justice, however complex and hard-fought, was ultimately and enduringly sweeter. And the work Jonathan knew, the essential work of bending the arc of the moral universe, continued.